Barbra Streisand thought it was just another lonely rehearsal night in Los Angeles. Until Elvis Presley showed up at her door unannounced. It was past midnight, the studio nearly empty, and what he told her under those dim stage lights would haunt her for years, until she finally revealed the truth. Studio B always felt different after midnight. The hallways grew quiet, the air cooler, the lights dimmer. Every sound echoed longer than it should. On April 19, 1975, the building felt almost abandoned. Barbra stood in the center of the recording room, wrapped in a long dark coat, finishing the last run-through of a soft ballad. Her voice floated through the speakers, gentle and steady, and then faded into silence. Only two sound engineers remained, Mark and Louis, sitting behind the glass, taking small notes on the control board. Barbra rubbed her hands together, warming them while she waited for playback. She loved late-night sessions. No pressure, no audience, no phones burning through her concentration. Just her voice, the microphone, and the soft hum of the machines. She believed the entire building had emptied by now. The security staff had already said goodnight. Then the service door clicked. It wasn't loud, just a small metallic sound. But in a near-empty studio at 12:47 a.m., it felt like a thunderclap. Barbra turned sharply toward the hallway. Mark looked up from the control booth, eyebrows raised. Louis paused the tape, listening. The building was locked. No one should have been entering. Barbra stepped closer to the doorway, cautious but curious. She heard it again, heavy boots echoing slowly down the corridor. A slow, deliberate rhythm. Not hurried, not casual. Almost like someone was gathering courage with each step. Her breath grew shallow. Who would come to a closed studio at this hour? And what would make someone walk toward her room instead of calling her name? The footsteps drew closer. The air felt warmer, almost charged. Barbra glanced back at the booth, where the engineers stared with wide eyes. She took a small step toward the hallway as the shadows stretched across the floor. Then she saw a figure approaching. Tall, broad, confident but somehow tired. The silhouette stopped in the doorway, framed by the faint red glow of the exit sign. He wore a white jacket, the collar slightly raised. His dark sunglasses reflected the studio lights. Even though the room had fallen silent, something about his presence filled the space like a chorus. Barbra froze. Couldn't be. Elvis? She whispered. He didn't answer right away. He simply removed his shades slowly, revealing eyes that looked heavier than she'd ever seen. Eyes that told her he hadn't slept. Eyes that carried stories no headline or concert could explain. Barbra felt her heartbeat climb, not out of fear, but out of confusion. What would make Elvis Presley walk into her studio in the middle of the night? And what could be weighing on him enough to break his own silence? She stepped closer to him. A soft clatter echoed as one of the mic stands vibrated from the movement. The studio lights flickered slightly, casting lines of gold across the floor. Mark pressed his forehead against the glass, trying to see better. Louis muttered, "No way, no way." Elvis removed his gloves slowly, stuffing them into his jacket pocket. His hands trembled just a little, something Barbra didn't expect. He wasn't performing. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't carrying that famous spark that followed him everywhere. He looked human, vulnerable, almost fragile. The hallway behind him stayed silent, as if the world had decided to pause until he spoke. Barbra felt a chill run up her arms as she realized he hadn't come for music. He hadn't come for a duet. He hadn't come for publicity. He came because something was breaking inside him. "Elvis?" she said again, voice soft, steady, urging him gently. "What are you doing here?" Elvis didn't move for a moment. He stood in the doorway as if deciding whether to step fully inside or turn around and disappear back into the night. Barbra felt her throat tighten. The king of rock and roll looked unsure, something she had never imagined she'd see with her own eyes. The air in Studio B grew heavy, humming with quiet tension. Finally, Elvis walked forward. Each step felt deliberate, almost hesitant, like he was entering a place where his armor wasn't allowed. The soft buzz of the overhead lights flickered against his jacket. When he reached the middle of the room, He let out a breath that sounded years old. "I needed to talk to someone who understands," he said. His voice wasn't loud. It was cracked at the edges, like someone who'd been carrying too many secrets for too long. Barbra stared at him, stunned. Elvis could have spoken to anyone, producers, managers, friends, but he had come here, at this hour, to her. She motioned toward the piano bench and they sat. The empty studio hummed with a delicate static, the kind that fills the silence when people don't know how to begin. Elvis ran a hand through his hair, elbows on his knees, head lowered. Barbra waited quietly. She didn't push. She didn't reach for him. She simply allowed the silence to guide him forward. He finally said, "I can't keep up with all of it anymore." His voice shook as if admitting weakness felt like breaking a rule he'd lived by his entire career. Barbra leaned closer. "What's going on?" He looked up, eyes tired from weeks, maybe months of strain. "The label wants a new tour schedule. My doctor wants rest. My manager wants more shows. And he swallowed hard. "I don't know what my voice wants." Those words cut through her. Elvis Presley, one of the greatest voices the world had ever heard, was questioning the very thing that made him a legend. The room seemed to shrink around them. Even Mark and Louis in the booth sat frozen, barely blinking. The mic stand rattled gently as if reacting to his confession. "What do you mean?" Barbra asked softly. Elvis stared at his hands. "Some nights it feels like my throat locks up, like the notes won't come out right, like something inside me is slipping, and I can't grab it back." His voice trembled again.
"I'm scared, Barbra."
Pattern breaker. The king scared. Barbra's heart tightened. She had lived under enormous pressure as well. High expectations, critics waiting to tear her apart, crowds demanding perfection. She understood his fear deeply. When a legend cracks, she thought, who holds them together? And why did he choose her? She asked gently, "Why me, Elvis?" He lifted his eyes to hers. "Because you don't want anything from me. You never did." His breath shook as he continued. "I can't tell my team. I can't show weakness in front of the band. Fans want a perfect king. But you—" he hesitated. "You know what it feels like to be crushed by your own voice." Barbra looked down, remembering nights when she doubted herself too. Nights when her songs felt heavier than applause. Nights when her voice trembled in ways only she noticed. She placed a hand near his, not touching, but close enough to let him feel her presence. Elvis exhaled shakily, almost relieved. For the first time that night, his shoulders dropped slightly, releasing some part of the burden he'd been holding. A low rumble echoed from the hallway as a delivery cart rolled by, reminding them the world still existed outside this fragile circle. Barbra felt the moment balancing on a knife's edge. Elvis had opened the door to something vulnerable, and she sensed more was coming, something deeper. Then Elvis took another breath, long, shaky, full of fear, and confessed the one truth he had never spoken aloud. Elvis didn't speak for several seconds. The room waited with him, the silence stretching thin like a thread about to snap. Barbra watched his breathing change, small, shallow, unsteady. When he finally looked up, she saw something rare in his eyes. Fear. Not stage fright, not nerves. Something deeper. "I'm afraid one day I'll walk on stage," he said, voice soft but shaking. "And nothing will come out." The words hit Barbra harder than she expected. She felt her chest tighten as if the confession had weight. Elvis Presley, the man who could silence entire arenas with a single breath, was terrified of losing the one thing the world thought he was born for. The buzz of the studio lights flickered, matching the tremble in his voice. Barbra leaned forward. "Elvis, your voice is still strong." He shook his head slowly. "Not every night." His hands opened and closed in his lap, fingers restless. "Some nights, it feels like my body is fighting me, like the notes are stuck behind a wall I can't break through." A soft, distant rumble from the building's air vents echoed through the room. It felt like the studio itself was reacting to his honesty. Mark and Louis in the booth exchanged worried looks but stayed silent, sensing the moment wasn't theirs to interrupt. Elvis swallowed, his throat tightening visibly. I don't want people to see me fall apart. I don't want them to watch me fade. His voice lowered to a whisper. I can't be forgotten, Barbara. Those words hung in the air like smoke. The king of rock and roll feared disappearing. Barbara felt something twist inside her. She knew what it meant to be judged by the world. She knew the terror of losing control of her voice. She understood the fear of disappointing millions. But seeing that fear inside Elvis, someone larger than life, made it feel heavier, more dangerous. How do you comfort someone the world thinks is unbreakable? She wondered. And what happens when the strongest voice trembles? She took a careful breath. Elvis, no one could ever forget you. He forced a small, sad smile. That's not how the world works. When you stop shining, they stop looking. His eyes drifted to the microphone across the room. I've given everything to my voice. If it goes, who am I? A pattern breaker moment hit the room. Elvis, stripped of fame, stripped of confidence, just a man facing the possibility of losing himself. Barbara stood slowly. The floor creaked beneath her feet as she stepped closer. Elvis watched her with wary eyes, unsure of what she would do. She placed her hand gently on the piano, grounding herself. Elvis, she said softly, your voice isn't the only part of you people love. He looked doubtful. You think they come for the man? They come for the sound. But the sound comes from the man, she replied. Elvis exhaled shakily, nerves threading through his breath. The overhead lights flickered again as if reacting to his inner storm. He leaned back, resting his shoulders against the piano bench, staring up at the ceiling. I'm tired, Barbara, he admitted. Tired of pretending everything is fine. Tired of smiling when I'm scared. Tired of being strong so other people don't worry. His voice cracked. Barbara didn't flinch. She knelt next to him, lowering herself until their eyes met. You don't have to be strong with me. Something loosened in his posture. Something small but real. He blinked hard, pushing back emotion he wasn't ready to show. The sound of a late-night motorcycle passing outside rattled the windows faintly, reminding them they were still part of a bigger world. But inside this room, only honesty existed. Elvis, Barbara said gently, tell me what you need. He looked at her hands, then her face, then the microphone. For a brief moment, she thought he might walk away from the conversation completely. But instead, he stood up, breath shaky, eyes full of something raw. Barbara followed him with her gaze, waiting. He turned toward her and made a choice that would define their night. He whispered, I need you to help me find my voice again. Barbara didn't answer right away. The request was heavy. Elvis Presley, a famous voice, was asking for help like a scared kid in a man's suit. She watched his hands shake, watched his shoulders rise and fall, and knew this moment mattered more than any performance. She stood slowly, feeling the weight of his words sit in the center of the room. The microphone waited for them, standing alone under a low light. Outside, Los Angeles hummed, but in Studio B, time moved slower. Then we go back to where it started, she said quietly. The mic, the song, just you and the truth. Her voice was calm, but inside, her heart raced. This wasn't about showmanship. It wasn't about charts or tickets or critics. This was about a man trying not to lose himself in the noise he had created. She walked to the piano and slid onto the bench. The cushion sighed under her weight. Elvis stayed still for a heartbeat, caught between fear and trust. Then he took a breath and followed her. His boots tapped softly on the floor, each step a small surrender. He stopped beside the mic, close enough to touch it, but not yet brave enough. Barbara looked up at him. Sing with me, she said. He froze. He hesitated. He looked at the door. Then slowly he stepped closer. What if nothing comes out? He asked. Then we try again, she replied. There's no crowd here, no cameras, just us. You're allowed to be human in this room, Elvis. Her words wrapped around him like a warm coat. The tightness in his jaw softened slightly. He reached for the mic stand, fingers brushing the cool metal. The sound of his touch echoed faintly. Mark and Louis watched from the booth, barely daring to breathe. Barbra pressed her fingers on the keys, testing a soft chord. The note floated into the air like a light. She chose a simple ballad, something slow and open, leaving space for every crack, every breath, every tremble in his voice. Elvis closed his eyes. Short breath, short pause, long silence. Then he sang. The first note wasn't perfect. It wavered, thin and rough, almost unsure of itself. For a second, Elvis flinched, as if he just proved his own fear right. But Barbra didn't stop playing. She leaned into the chord, giving his voice something to lean on. Again, she said softly. He tried the line once more. This time it landed stronger, though still not the booming power the world expected from him. It was smaller, more fragile, but honest. And in that honesty, there was something beautiful. Why do broken voices sometimes feel truer than flawless ones? And why does sincerity hold us longer than perfection ever could? Their voices met in the middle when she joined in. Hers, steady, smooth, grounded. His shaky, raw, full of history. The blend didn't sound like a polished studio track. It sounded like two people holding on to the same rope in a storm. The room changed. The air thickened with feeling. The old wood panels of Studio B seemed to listen. The soft hum of the tape machines became a kind of heartbeat. Even the tiny red, record-ready light looked like an eye refusing to blink. Elvis's voice grew steadier line by line. The cracks didn't vanish, but they became part of the sound, like scars that had learned how to sing. His shoulders dropped. His hands relaxed. The color returned to his face. Barbra felt her own eyes burn. She realized she wasn't just helping him find his voice. He was reminding her why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. When the final note faded into silence, the room held its breath with them. Elvis opened his eyes, looking changed. And then he told her the real reason he had come that night. Elvis didn't speak at first. He kept one hand on the microphone, breathing through the last vibrations of the song. The studio felt warm, almost glowing after everything they had poured into the silence. Barbra could see it in his eyes. Something had shifted. Something had opened. But the moment didn't feel finished yet. He stepped back from the mic and rubbed his palms together. A nervous habit. Barbra had never seen him do that before. He looked down at the floor, then at her, then away again. His voice came out low. "Barbra, I didn't come here for music." She froze. A quiet tremor crawled through her chest. "What do you mean?" she asked. Elvis sat on the edge of the stage platform, elbows on his knees. He looked like a man carrying a weight the world couldn't see. His breathing hitched, and he wiped a hand across his face as if clearing years of sweat and worry. "I came," he said slowly, "because I think I only have a handful of performances left before people notice something's wrong." The sentence cracked in the middle. Barbra's heart clenched. This wasn't fear anymore. This was truth. He continued, voice trembling. "My body's slower. My voice. Some nights it barely holds. And I don't want the world to watch me fall apart on stage. I wanted someone to hear me before I disappear behind the lights." Barbra swallowed hard. She moved closer until she was standing right in front of him. "Elvis, you're not disappearing." He gave a tiny, defeated smile. "Feels like it." The room shifted again the way it had earlier, like the air was making room for something sacred. Mark and Louis watched through the glass, their faces carved with sympathy they didn't dare show. Barbra knelt down so she was eye level with him. "People don't love you because you're perfect," she said. "They love you because you make them feel something." Elvis blinked, slowly, painfully, like her words reached somewhere the world hadn't reached in years. He whispered, "I don't want to be remembered as the man who lost his voice." "And you won't," she replied. "You'll be remembered as the man who dared to sing when the world was too loud." He looked at her for a long moment, letting that sink in. His eyes softened, just slightly, but enough for her to see the boy beneath the legend. A boy from Tupelo who never expected his voice to change the world. They talked for hours after that. About the early days. About the pressure. About the nights when applause didn't feel like comfort. About the fear of being misunderstood. About the loneliness that follows fame like a shadow. Their conversation drifted through the studio like a warm current, touching every corner of the room. Sometimes they laughed quietly. Sometimes his voice cracked. Sometimes Barbra reached out and rested her hand on his shoulder just to let him know she was there. He told her stories he had never told the press. Nights when he doubted himself. Nights when he felt abandoned by his own voice. Nights when fame felt like a cage with golden bars. Barbra listened to all of it. No judgment. No shock. Just understanding. Who becomes our anchor when the spotlight grows too heavy? She wondered. And what healing happens in places the world never sees? The dim studio clock ticked into the early morning as dawn crept across Los Angeles. Faint blue lights slipped through the blinds, brushing gently against the studio floor. Elvis looked up at it and sighed, as if the new day were something unfamiliar. I should go, he murmured. Barbra nodded but didn't stand yet. She sensed something else coming, a final moment. Something he wasn't ready to leave without sharing. Elvis reached into his pocket. His hand shook. He took a breath, long and heavy. Then he placed something small into her hand. Something she didn't expect at all. Barbra didn't open her hand right away. She could feel the weight of the object resting in her palm. Small but filled with meaning she didn't yet understand. Elvis stepped back, watching her with a softness that felt completely different from the fear he had carried earlier. Dawn light filtered into Studio B, giving everything a quiet blue glow. Look, he whispered. Barbra slowly unfolded her fingers. Sitting in her hand was a small gold pin, warm from his pocket. The initials EP were engraved in the center, delicate and shining under the studio lights. The object felt old, carried, loved. She recognized it. He had worn it during early tours, pinned inside his jacket near his heart. Elvis, why are you giving me this? She asked, voice barely a breath. He looked down at the floor. Because if I ever forget who I am, I want someone out there to remind me. Those words hit her like a soft blow. She felt her throat close, emotion rising too quickly to hide. The pin suddenly felt heavier, as if it contained every fear he had confessed that night. Years later, when news of his passing spread across the world, Barbra sat alone in her home, replaying the memory. She held the gold pin in her hand the entire time. Cameras pointed at her during interviews, but she never revealed what it meant. She tucked it inside her dressing room drawer, wrapped in the same cloth she kept her Lucky Charms in. Only she knew the story. Fans all over the world cried for him. Radio stations played tribute loops. Old TV clips surfaced, one showing Elvis humming behind Barbra during a rehearsal years earlier. The sound was faint, almost ghost-like, the tape hugging his voice like fog. People called it a rare moment. But for her, it was a reminder. What pieces of someone stay after they're gone? She wondered. And why do some stories wait years before they find their voice? Decades after that night, Barbra finally shared the truth. The real truth. And the final detail she revealed broke hearts everywhere. Barbra sat across from the interviewer, fingers gently wrapped around the gold pin she'd kept hidden for decades. The cameras were on, but the room felt strangely intimate, like she was speaking only to him and to Elvis. Her voice stayed steady, but her eyes carried the weight of the memory she had guarded for so long. She finally said, "The goodbye he gave me wasn't sad. It was peaceful." She explained how he had walked out of Studio B that morning, not like a man defeated, but like someone who had finally laid down a heavy burden. Barbra kept the pin in her dressing room for years, touching it before every important performance, reminding herself of the quiet courage hidden behind fame. He didn't need strength, she said softly. He needed someone to understand him. Her words made the interviewer pause, pen hovering in the air. The studio went silent, as if the whole world leaned closer to hear the rest. Who understands you when the world doesn't? And whose fear could you soften tonight? Barbra looked down at the pin one more time. Then she revealed the detail she had never spoken aloud until now. Elvis asked me to keep this, she whispered, because he wanted one person to remember the man, not the myth. And I did. She closed her hand around the pin, holding it gently against her heart. The story ends, but the reminder never will. If the story moved you, share it with someone who might need a moment of quiet courage tonight. Sometimes the gentlest truths come from the people we think are untouchable. Tell us in the comments, what memory of a legend, or of someone you love, still stays with you after all these years?